The moment I knew something was wrong wasn't when I found the sold sign. It wasn't even when I saw strangers walking through what should have been my living room. It was when my wedding dress, still in its garment bag, slipped from my trembling fingers and crumpled onto the sidewalk outside our dream home. I'm Gianna, and 6 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. Alejandro and I had spent countless nights planning every detail of this house. From the exposed wooden beams to the marble kitchen island where we'd host Sunday brunches, each element was carefully chosen to create our perfect life together. "Miss, are you okay?" A woman's voice snapped me back to reality. She was standing in the doorway, my doorway, holding a clipboard. "I'm Joanna, the realtor. Are you here for the final walkthrough?" I couldn't speak. My eyes were fixed on the couple walking through my kitchen, running their hands along the countertops Alejandro and I had picked out together. "There must be some mistake," I finally managed. "This is my house. My fiancé and I built it." Joanna's professional smile faltered. "Oh, are you Alejandro's ex? He mentioned there might be some confusion. The sale was finalized last week." "Ex?" The word hit me like a physical blow. My phone was in my hand before I realized what I was doing. "Alejandro, where are you? There are people in our house." My voice sounded strange, distant. "Gianna." His voice was cold, unfamiliar. "I was going to tell you. Things have changed. I've changed." "Changed? We built this house together. We're getting married in 2 months. I met someone else, Bianca. She understands me better." He paused. "The house is sold. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the rest." The line went dead. Sophie, my sister, found me sitting on the curb an hour later, my wedding dress still lying in a heap beside me. "I came as soon as you texted," she said, wrapping her arms around me. "That absolute bastard. Everything we planned." I gestured at the house. All of it was a lie. "Not everything," Sophie said, pulling me to my feet. "Remember that document Harold made you sign? The one Alejandro thought was just insurance paperwork." I froze. The memory surfaced slowly. Harold, our family lawyer, insisting I sign certain papers before construction began. "Just protecting your interests," he'd said with a knowing look. Alejandro had been too busy with the contractors to pay attention. "Call Harold," Sophie urged. "Now." My hand shook as I dialed. Harold's familiar voice answered on the second ring. "Gianna, I was about to call you. I just received some interesting paperwork regarding your property." "He sold it, Harold. Alejandro sold our house." "Did he now?" Harold's tone shifted. "Without your signature on the deed?" "What do you mean?" "Remember that document you signed in my office? The one Alejandro didn't read?" Harold paused. "You might want to come by. There's something you need to see." For the first time since seeing that sold sign, I felt something other than despair, something that felt dangerously like hope. "What exactly did I sign, Harold?" Let's just say Alejandro may have overlooked a rather crucial detail about the property's ownership. Harold's voice held a hint of satisfaction. "And Gianna, bring those construction receipts you kept, all of them." I looked up at the house, my house, where the new owners were still walking through rooms I had designed. Rooms that held the ghosts of futures I'd imagined, futures that would never be. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, a new strength in my voice. As Sophie drove us away, I caught a glimpse of something in the upstairs window. A woman with long dark hair watching me, Bianca. She raised her hand in what might have been a wave, or maybe a gesture of apology. I didn't wave back. "You know what Mum always said?" Sophie asked as we turned the corner. "Sometimes the universe has to break your heart to heal your vision." I clutched my phone, thinking of the document waiting in Harold's office. Maybe it's time to test that theory. The wedding dress lay forgotten on the back seat as we drove toward Harold's office, toward answers, toward justice, and maybe, just maybe, toward revenge. Harold's office hadn't changed in the 20 years I'd known him. Same leather chairs, same wall of law books, same framed photo of him with my parents at their wedding. What had changed was how I saw it all now. No longer just a familiar place, but a sanctuary of justice. The property deed, Harold said, sliding a document across his desk, lists you as the primary owner. I stared at the paper, but Alejandro and I paid for everything together. Did you? Harold raised an eyebrow. Show me those receipts. My hands trembled as I pulled out the folder I'd obsessively maintained throughout construction. Harold examined each receipt, making small noises of interest. Just as I suspected, he said finally. Every major purchase was made through your personal account. The down payment, the construction materials, even the permits. Because Alejandro said his account had better interest rates for the mortgage, I remembered, the realization hitting me. He promised to transfer his share, which he never did, Sophie finished, leaning forward in her chair. That sneaky bastard. Harold nodded. Technically, you financed about 80% of that house, and with this deed, he tapped the document. The sale isn't legal without your signature. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Hi Gianna, this is Joanna, the realtor. The new owners, Carson and his wife, would like to discuss the property situation. Please call me. Don't respond, Harold advised. Not yet. There's more you need to know. Sophie's phone chimed next. She read the message and let out a low whistle. You're going to want to hear this, sis. My friend at the bank, remember Maria? She says Alejandro took out a massive loan last month using the house as collateral. He what? I stood up, pacing the office. Can he even do that? Not legally, Harold said, reaching for his phone. Let me make a few calls. While Harold stepped out, Sophie grabbed my hand. Remember when we were kids and Dad lost his job? Mom didn't just sit around crying. She fought back, started her own business. And now she owns half the restaurants in town. I smiled, remembering our mother's determination. Exactly. You're her daughter. Time to show Alejandro what that means. Harold returned, looking pleased. I've got some interesting news. The loan Alejandro took out. He listed Bianca as a co-signer. She's legally liable for that debt. Poor Bianca, Sophie muttered. Wonder if she knows what she's gotten herself into. A plan was forming in my mind. Harold, what if I went to see the house? Met these new owners? Carefully, he warned. Don't mention the deed yet. Just observe. I'll go with you, Sophie offered. We can play it casual, like we're just checking out the neighborhood. Harold handed me his card. Give this to Carson if the topic of ownership comes up. And Gianna? He paused, his expression serious. Remember what your father always said about revenge? The best revenge is success, I quoted. But Dad never had his house stolen by his fiancé. No, Harold smiled, but he did teach you to play chess. Think 3 moves ahead. As Sophie and I left the office, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a social media notification. Alejandro had posted a photo of himself and Bianca in front of my dream house. My house. The caption read, New beginnings with my soulmate. Oh, he's really asking for it now, Sophie growled. I zoomed in on the photo. Behind Alejandro's confident smile and Bianca's designer sunglasses, I could see my carefully chosen curtains in the windows. The garden I'd planted was beginning to bloom. 3 moves ahead, I murmured, thinking of the chess lessons Dad had given us on Sunday afternoons. First move, meet Carson and his wife. Second move, Sophie asked. Find out exactly what Alejandro told them about the house's history. I straightened my shoulders. And third move, I showed her the deed in my bag. Make sure everyone knows exactly who owns those blooming roses. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Alejandro. Hope you're doing okay. The house sale was for the best. You'll understand someday. I didn't reply. Instead, I saved his message as evidence and dialed Joanna's number. Hi, Joanna. This is Gianna. About meeting Carson and his wife. I caught Sophie's encouraging nod. How about tomorrow afternoon? As we walked to the car, I felt something I hadn't experienced since seeing that sold sign. Strength. Alejandro might have taken my trust, my wedding plans, and temporarily my house, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail. He'd forgotten who I am. and he was about to remember. That evening, Sophie insisted I come to our parents' house for dinner. Mom's making her famous lasagna, she said, but I knew what she really meant. Family rallies, in a crisis. The familiar scent of garlic and herbs hit me as soon as we walked in. Mom was stress cooking, the way she always did when one of her children was hurting. Dad sat at the kitchen island, surrounded by old papers. Perfect timing, he said, gesturing to the documents. I've been going through some old files. Thought you might find this interesting. I picked up the yellowed paper he was pointing to. It was a property deed from 30 years ago, with an unfamiliar address. Your mother and I never told you about our first house, Dad began, his voice unusually quiet. Or rather, the house that should have been ours. Mom turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. Robert, are you sure? She needs to hear this, Anna. Dad pushed his reading glasses up. We were young, just like you, had everything planned out, but my business partner at the time, someone I trusted completely, he did something similar to what Alejandro did to you. What happened? I sat down, Sophie's hand on my shoulder. He sold our dream house right from under us, Mum said, joining us at the island. Used the money to start a competing business. We were devastated. But you never mentioned... Because what happened next was more important, Dad smiled. Your mother, instead of crumbling, turned it into motivation. We started small, a food truck outside business districts, then another, then our first restaurant. And now look at us, Mom gestured around her designer kitchen. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted leads you to what you were meant to have. My phone buzzed, Harold calling. Gianna, I found something interesting in the property records. Alejandro's loan, he used falsified documents to secure it. The bank's fraud department is very interested. What does that mean for Bianca? I asked, thinking of her uncertain wave from the window. It means she's in trouble if she knew about it. But if she didn't... Harold paused. She might be a valuable ally. After hanging up, I noticed Sophie scrolling through her phone with a frown. What is it? Bianca's social media. She turned the screen toward me. Look at her latest post. It was a photo of Bianca in front of a coming soon sign for a new luxury condo development. The caption read, "Sometimes dreams change, and that's okay. That new chapter, shall moving on." Posted an hour ago, Sophie noted. Trouble in paradise already. Dad adjusted his glasses again. You know, when my ex-partner betrayed me, the worst part wasn't losing the house. It was realizing how many other people he'd hurt along the way. I need to talk to Bianca, I decided. But first, I need to see Carson tomorrow. Mum, what would you do? She smiled, that familiar, determined glint in her eye. I'd remember that the truth has a way of coming out. Just make sure you're there when it does. Later that night, as Sophie drove me home, I received another text from Joanna. Carson and his wife will meet you at 2 p.m. tomorrow. They seem eager to discuss something important. Ready for this? Sophie asked. I thought about Dad's story, about Mom's strength, about Bianca's cryptic post. More than ready. Back at my apartment, I spread everything out on my coffee table. The property deed, the construction receipts, Harold's notes about the fraudulent loan. 3 moves ahead, like Dad taught me. But as I studied the documents, something caught my eye. Sophie, I called out, look at these dates. She leaned over my shoulder. The loan was approved 2 days before he met Bianca. Which means he was planning this before he even met her. Sophie's eyes widened. She might be as much a victim as you are. I grabbed my phone and opened my banking app, scrolling through months of transactions. There it was. Regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize, starting long before Bianca entered the picture. Call Harold, Sophie urged. This changes everything. But before I could dial, a text from an unknown number appeared. This is Bianca. We need to talk. There's something you should know about Alejandro and the house, please. I showed Sophie the message. She nodded slowly. 3 moves ahead, right? Meeting Carson tomorrow, talking to Bianca, and then... And then we show Alejandro exactly what happens when you underestimate the daughter of Anna and Robert Meyer. I looked at my parents' old property deed again, thinking about how they'd turned their loss into an empire. Maybe it was time for history to repeat itself, but this time with a different ending, one where justice wins. The next day, I stood across the street from my house, watching Carson and his wife pull into the driveway. Sophie squeezed my hand before heading to her car. "Remember, just gather information. I'll be at the coffee shop around the corner if you need me." Joanna greeted me with professional warmth. "Gianna, thank you for coming. Carson and Emma are excited to meet you." Carson stepped forward, extending his hand. He looked nothing like I'd imagined. Kind eyes, casual clothes, worried expression. "We're glad you could make it. There's something we need to discuss." Emma, his wife, nodded earnestly. "We've discovered some concerning information about the sale." My heart raced as they led me inside. The furniture was different, but the bones of the house, my house, remained unchanged. The morning light still streamed through the kitchen windows exactly as I'd planned it. "Coffee," Emma offered, gesturing to the kitchen island. My kitchen island. "Actually," Carson interrupted, pulling out some papers, "we should probably get straight to this. Yesterday, our bank called about the mortgage." Joanna shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps I should step out." "No, please stay," I said. "What did the bank say?" Carson spread the papers on the island. "They're questioning the validity of the sale. Something about incomplete ownership transfer and a suspicious loan." He looked at me directly. "They mentioned your name." "I designed this house," I said quietly. "Built it with my ex-fiancé, Alejandro." "The seller?" Emma's eyes widened. "He told us he was the sole owner. Said it was an investment property." "Investment property?" I couldn't help but laugh. "I picked out every tile, every light fixture. My name is on most of the receipts." "That explains this." Carson pulled out another document, a letter from the bank's fraud department. They flagged some irregularities with the loan Alejandro used as proof of ownership. My phone buzzed. Another text from Bianca. "Meeting with bank investigators tomorrow. Need to talk before then, please." "Excuse me," I said, stepping onto the back porch. My back porch. I dialed Bianca's number. "Gianna?" Her voice was shaky. "Thank God. I've been trying to figure out how to reach you." "I'm at the house right now with Carson and Emma." "Don't tell them everything yet," she said quickly. "Alejandro, he's not who either of us thought. The loan, the house sale, it's just the beginning. There's more." "Meet me in an hour," I suggested. "The coffee shop on Maple?" "Yes. And Gianna, I'm so sorry." Back inside, Carson was showing me more bank documents. "We've put a hold on the final payments," he explained. "Something feels wrong about all this." "The thing is," Emma added, "we love this house, but we want to do things right." She hesitated. "Would you consider, if everything gets sorted out legally, would you sell to us properly?" I looked around the room, at the life I'd planned, at the strangers who'd fallen in love with my dream just as I had. "Let me talk to my lawyer, and there are some things you should know about the property's history." Joanna stepped forward. "I had no idea about any of this. If I'd known—" "It's not your fault," I assured her. "But I'd appreciate copies of all the sale documents." "Of course." She pulled out her phone. "I'll send them right over." As I turned to leave, Emma caught my arm. "Wait, there's something else. A woman came by yesterday, Bianca. She was looking for paperwork Alejandro might have left behind. She seemed scared." My phone buzzed again. "Sophie, you need to see this. Local business news. Alejandro's company is under investigation." "Thank you for telling me all this," I said to Carson and Emma. "My lawyer will be in touch." Outside, the spring air felt different somehow. Clearer, like after a storm. I checked the business news on my phone. The headline made my heart stop. "Local developer under investigation for multiple fraudulent property deals." I texted Harold. "Meeting Bianca in an hour. Need you to look into Alejandro's other properties." His response was immediate. Already on it. Don't sign anything. Don't promise anything. And Gianna? Be careful. People who commit fraud rarely stop at one lie. Walking to my car, I noticed a familiar black SUV parked down the street. Alejandro's car. He was watching, probably had been all along. I pulled out my phone one last time, typing quickly. Enjoying the show, Alejandro, because it's just getting started. Then I drove toward the coffee shop, toward Bianca, toward whatever revelation was coming next. In my rearview mirror, I saw the black SUV pull away from the curb. Let him follow, let him worry, let him wonder what I know. Because after everything I'd learned today, I finally understood what Dad meant about thinking 3 moves ahead. Alejandro thought he was playing chess, but he'd never bothered to learn the rules. The coffee shop was busy when I arrived, but I spotted Bianca immediately. Gone were the designer sunglasses and confident pose from her social media photos. Instead, she sat hunched over a laptop, her face drawn with worry. I ordered you a latte, she said as I sat down. I remember Alejandro mentioning it was your favorite. Thanks. I studied her face. You said there's more to the story. Bianca turned her laptop toward me. Look at these property records. The house he sold you, it wasn't the first time. The screen showed a pattern of property purchases, quick sales, and suspicious loans spanning the past 3 years. My stomach turned as I recognized the scheme. He finds vulnerable people, Bianca explained, her voice trembling. People planning to build their dream homes. He helps them, gains their trust, then takes everything, I finished. How did you find this? Because I was supposed to be next. She pulled out a folder. These are the papers he wanted me to sign last week, for our new house. Her laugh was bitter. I'm an accountant. The numbers didn't add up, so I started digging. Sophie appeared with fresh coffees. Thought you two might need these. Harold's on his way. Harold? Bianca looked alarmed. My family lawyer, I explained. He's been tracking Alejandro's financial movements. Good. Bianca pulled out her phone. Because Alejandro just texted me. He knows I met with the bank investigators. He's threatening to implicate me in everything. Can he? Sophie asked. No. Bianca's hand shook as she reached for her coffee. I never signed anything. But he doesn't know that I kept copies of everything he asked me to sign, including this. She slid a document across the table. It was a power of attorney form, filled out but unsigned. He wanted me to sign this yesterday, said it was for our future together. Bianca's voice cracked. He was going to use it to transfer more properties into my name, take out more loans. Harold arrived, looking grave. Ladies, we need to move fast. The bank's fraud department just called. Alejandro's trying to leave the country. What? I stood up. He can't just... He's at the house right now, Bianca interrupted, showing us her phone. Says he's collecting some final documents. But I know what he's really after. The safe, I whispered, behind the painting in the study. Sophie was already calling Carson. Don't let him take anything from the house. Yes, we're on our way. The drive back to the house was tense. As we pulled up, I saw Alejandro's black SUV in the driveway. Carson stood blocking the front door, arms crossed. He's inside, Emma called from the porch. We tried to stop him, but he had keys. I rushed past her, hearing footsteps above. The study. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, I reached the 2nd floor just as Alejandro emerged from the room, clutching a manila envelope. Gianna, he froze. You shouldn't be here. Neither should you. I stepped forward. That's my house, my safe, my documents. Our house, he corrected, but his voice wavered. Everything I did for us. For us? Bianca appeared behind me. Like what you did to those other families. Like what you planned to do to me. Alejandro's face darkened. You don't understand. I had a system. It was perfect until you got greedy. Harold's voice boomed from the stairs. The police are on their way, Alejandro, along with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. You can't prove anything. Alejandro clutched the envelope tighter. Actually, I stepped closer, we can prove everything. Every receipt, Every fraudulent loan, every family you betrayed. It's over. Alejandro lunged for the stairs, but Sophie was there, blocking his path. In his confusion, he dropped the envelope. Papers scattered across the floor. Evidence of all his schemes, now in plain sight. "I loved you," I said quietly, watching him realize he was trapped. "I trusted you, but you know what? You taught me something valuable." "What's that?" he spat. "That sometimes losing everything." I picked up the fallen documents. "Is how you find out who you really are." Blue lights flashed outside. Alejandro's shoulders slumped as police officers entered the house. As they led him away, Bianca touched my arm. "I really am sorry about everything." "I know." I looked around the house, my house, feeling something shift inside me. "Want to help me make things right? There are other families out there who deserve justice too." She nodded, determination replacing fear in her eyes. Carson and Emma stood uncertainly in the hallway. "So, about the house." "Let's talk next week," I suggested. "I think we can work something out." Through the window, I watched the police car drive away with Alejandro. The garden I'd planted was in full bloom now, survivors of a storm they never knew was coming. Just like me. The next morning, Harold's office was crowded. Bianca and I sat side by side, watching as he spread documents across his desk. 2 FBI agents stood nearby, taking notes. "We've identified 7 other properties," Agent Roberts said, pointing to a map. "All following the same pattern." 8, Bianca corrected, pulling up spreadsheets on her laptop. "I found another one last night. A retired couple in Florida. They lost everything." My phone buzzed, a text from Sophie. "Turn on the news, now." Harold flipped on the office TV. Alejandro's face filled the screen, being led into the courthouse in handcuffs. The headline scrolled beneath, "Local developer charged in multi-state property fraud scheme." "We'll need both of you to testify," Agent Torres said, handing us cards. "The preliminary hearing is next week." "What about the other victims?" I asked. "The families who lost their homes?" "That's where it gets interesting." Harold smiled, pulling out a thick folder. "The bank's fraud department has frozen all associated assets, including offshore accounts we didn't even know about." Bianca leaned forward. "How much?" "Enough to make restitution to every family," Harold said. "Plus, with the evidence you provided about the falsified loans." A knock at the door interrupted him. Joanna entered, looking flustered. "Sorry to barge in, but you need to see this." She handed me her tablet. It was an email from Alejandro's business partner, sent to their entire client list. "In light of recent events, I am dissolving my partnership with Alejandro. To those affected by his actions, I pledge full cooperation with authorities and personal assistance in recovering your losses." "He's trying to save himself," Bianca scoffed. "Maybe," Agent Roberts said, "but it helps our case. Speaking of which," he turned to me, "about your house." "I know what I want to do," I said, "but first, I need to meet those families." The next few days were a blur of meetings. Each story was different, yet heartbreakingly similar to mine. A young couple from Seattle who lost their life savings. An elderly widow in Miami who nearly became homeless. A single father in Chicago trying to build a home for his kids. "We can make this right," I told them in Harold's conference room. "Together." Bianca proved invaluable, her accounting skills uncovering hidden assets we could freeze. She worked tirelessly, as if making up for her unwitting role in Alejandro's schemes. "Found another account," she announced one evening as we worked late. "Hidden under his mother's maiden name. There's enough here to restore the Chicago family's down payment." My phone lit up with a message from Carson. "Emma and I have been thinking, what if we turn the house into a temporary home for families while their cases are being resolved?" I showed Bianca the text. She smiled. "You know, that's not a bad idea." "It's perfect, actually," I replied to Carson. "Let's talk details tomorrow." Later that night, Sophie brought dinner to my apartment. "Mum and Dad want to know if you're coming to Sunday dinner," The whole family's gathering to celebrate. Celebrate what? You, dummy. Standing up to Alejandro, helping those families, being you. I was about to respond when my phone rang. Agent Torres. We found something in Alejandro's personal emails. Love letters, going back years. He was playing this game long before he met you. Send them to Harold, I said, my hand steady as I took notes, and check the dates against property records. After hanging up, I noticed Sophie watching me. What? Remember when we were kids and I broke your favorite doll? You didn't just cry about it. You organized all the neighborhood kids to help you fix it. And we ended up starting a toy repair club. I smiled at the memory. Exactly. You've always been like this, turning bad things into something good. My phone buzzed again. A text from Bianca. Meeting with another family tomorrow. They lost their home in Arizona. Could use your support. I looked around my apartment, at the wall of photos showing happy moments with family and friends. None with Alejandro. Somehow, I'd known even then. You know what, Sophie? Tell Mum and Dad I'll be there Sunday. But first, I pulled out my laptop. Help me draft an email to Carson and Emma. I have an idea for the house. What kind of idea? Something Mom would approve of. Remember how she always said, when life gives you lemons, don't just make lemonade, Sophie finished. Open a lemonade stand and franchise it. I began typing, Dear Carson and Emma, what if we didn't just help one family at a time? What if we created something bigger? Outside, the city lights twinkled, reminding me of all the homes out there, all the dreams waiting to be rebuilt. Alejandro had tried to destroy mine. Instead, he'd helped me find my purpose. The courthouse buzzed with tension as I took the witness stand. Alejandro sat at the defense table, wearing an ill-fitting suit that made him look smaller than I remembered. Bianca squeezed my hand as I passed. Please state your name for the record, the prosecutor began. Gianna Meyer. Ms. Meyer, can you tell us about your relationship with the defendant? I looked directly at Alejandro as I spoke. He was my fiancé. We were building what I thought was our dream home. What happened to that home? He sold it without my knowledge or consent, despite my name being on the deed and my money funding most of the construction. The prosecutor held up a document. Exhibit A, Your Honor. The property deed listing Ms. Meyer as primary owner. Alejandro's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client maintains he had verbal agreement. Objection overruled, the judge interrupted. Continue. The prosecutor displayed my construction receipts on the courtroom screen. Ms. Meyer, can you explain these payments? Every major purchase came from my account. Alejandro promised to transfer his share, but never did. And when did you discover the sale? When I found strangers walking through my house. My voice cracked slightly. The same day I learned he'd been seeing someone else, Alejandro shifted uncomfortably as the prosecutor continued. Did you later discover other victims of similar schemes? Yes. Working with Bianca and the FBI, we found 8 other families. Each one lost their homes, their savings. Objection. Alejandro's lawyer jumped up. Relevance. Goes to pattern of behavior, Your Honor. The prosecutor countered. Overruled. Continue. I described each case. The retired couple, the single father, the young family in Seattle. With each story, Alejandro seemed to shrink further into his chair. During a brief recess, Harold pulled me aside. The jury's paying attention, and wait until they hear from the other families. One by one, they testified. The widow from Miami broke down, describing how she'd nearly become homeless. The Chicago father brought photos of his kids, showing where they'd planned to build their rooms. Then came Bianca's testimony. He asked me to sign power of attorney documents, she stated firmly. When I refused, he threatened me. Did the defendant explain why he needed your signature? He said it was for our future together, but I'd seen the pattern by then, how he used people's trust against them. During cross-examination, Alejandro's lawyer tried to paint him as a misunderstood businessman. Wasn't this simply a series of investment properties gone wrong? Investment properties? Bianca's voice rose. He deliberately targeted vulnerable people, gained their trust, then stole everything they had. I saw the emails, the bank records, the threats. The prosecution's final witness was Agent Roberts. He presented a timeline of Alejandro's schemes, complete with bank transfers and falsified documents. In total, he concluded, we've traced over $4 million in fraudulent transactions. During closing arguments, I watched the jury's faces. They looked at the evidence, at Alejandro, at the families he'd hurt. Their expressions told me everything I needed to know. The verdict came back in less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Alejandro's face went pale as the judge began listing sentences, multiple years for each count, to be served consecutively. Additionally, the judge continued, the defendant is ordered to make full restitution to all victims. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. Harold handled most questions, while I stood with Bianca and the other families. What happens now? The widow from Miami asked. I shared a look with Carson and Emma, who'd been sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom. Remember that house Alejandro sold? We're turning it into something new. A transitional home, Emma explained, for families recovering from real estate fraud. And a resource center, Carson added. Legal aid, financial counseling, whatever people need to rebuild. The first family moves in next week, I said, and we're already looking at expanding to other cities. Bianca pulled out her tablet. I've set up a foundation to manage everything. The money we recovered from Alejandro's hidden accounts will fund it for years. My phone buzzed, Sophie sending a photo of Mom and Dad, watching the verdict on TV, champagne glasses raised. As the crowd dispersed, I noticed Alejandro being led to a police transport. Our eyes met briefly. I thought he might try to say something, but he just looked away. Ready to go? Bianca asked. The families want to see the house. I nodded, thinking of all the dreams Alejandro had tried to destroy. Instead, he'd created something he never intended, a community of survivors helping each other heal. You know what my mum always says about karma? I told Bianca as we walked to the car. What's that? It's not about getting even, it's about getting better. Looking back at the courthouse one last time, I smiled. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways, and sometimes it comes with keys to a new beginning. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as I brewed coffee for our first house meeting. Around the island, my island, sat faces that had become familiar. Carson and Emma, Bianca, the Chicago father named Marcus, and Sarah, the widow from Miami. The contractor finished the renovations yesterday, Carson reported, spreading out blueprints. Each apartment has its own kitchen and bathroom. Perfect timing, Bianca said, checking her tablet. I've got 3 more families needing temporary housing while their cases are processed. The doorbell rang. Sophie entered with Mom and Dad, carrying boxes of pastries from Mom's restaurant. Thought the first meeting needed proper fuel. And proper advice, Dad added, setting down his briefcase. I've been talking with some business contacts about expanding the foundation. Emma poured coffee for everyone. How many properties are we looking at now? 3 potential locations, Bianca answered. Similar setup to this one. Transitional housing plus support services. Speaking of support, Marcus spoke up. My brother's law firm wants to provide pro bono services for future families. Sarah nodded. And my investment group is interested in funding the Seattle location. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Harold, carrying a stack of documents. Just got these from the court. Alejandro's overseas accounts have been frozen. The money's being transferred to the foundation. That's not why you're smiling, Sophie observed. No, Harold grinned. I'm smiling because of this. He handed me an envelope. The deed to the property next door. The bank's selling it at a discount given the circumstances. Perfect for the counseling center, Mom said, squeezing my hand. Just like we discussed. I opened my mouth to respond when a knock at the back door interrupted us. Joanna stood there, looking excited. Sorry I'm late, but you need to see this. She held up her phone, showing a news article. Local real estate fraud leads to national reform. New laws proposed to protect homebuyers. They're calling it the Meyer Act, she beamed. After you. After all of us, I corrected, looking around the room at these people who'd become more than victims. They'd become family. Well, Dad raised his coffee cup. I'd say that calls for a toast. To new beginnings, Sophie suggested. To justice, Bianca added. To home, I said simply, and everyone nodded. As the meeting continued, I stepped onto the back porch for a moment. The garden I'd planted was thriving, but now it was different. Sarah had added her favorite roses. Marcus's kids had planted sunflowers. Emma had started an herb garden. My phone buzzed, a text from the FBI. 2 more victims identified. Ready to help? Send them our way, I replied. We've got room. Behind me, I heard the happy chaos of people planning, healing, building something new from the ashes of broken dreams. Sophie joined me on the porch. Remember what you said when you first saw this house, she asked, about making memories here? Yeah, I smiled. Just didn't expect them to be these kinds of memories. Better ones, she corrected. Look, through the window, I could see Marcus's kids helping Sarah with her tablet. Carson and Emma were reviewing plans with Dad. Mom was teaching Bianca her secret recipe for comfort food. Harold and Marcus were discussing legal strategies. You know what this reminds me of? Sophie grinned. That toy repair club we started as kids. Except now we're fixing bigger things. Bigger things, she agreed. Better things. The morning sun caught the windows of the house next door. Our future counseling center. Soon it would be full of people helping others rebuild their lives, just as these people had helped me rebuild mine. My phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. Saw the news about the Meyer Act. You won. I'm sorry. A. I showed Sophie the text. Should I respond? Nah, she said. Some people only learn when it's too late. Besides, she gestured at the bustling kitchen. You've got better things to do. Inside, Marcus was speaking. My kids asked if we could plant a vegetable garden out back. Perfect spot next to the sunflowers, I said, rejoining the group. We can make it a community project. Community, Mum repeated thoughtfully. That's what he never understood, isn't it? That a house isn't just walls and deeds. It's people, I finished. It's healing. It's hope. Looking around at these faces, no longer strangers, no longer just victims, I felt something settle in my heart. Alejandro had tried to steal my dream home. Instead, he'd helped me build something far more valuable. A home for healing, a foundation for justice, a family forged in resilience, and that was worth more than any house could ever be.